Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 569. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. Okay, we ready?
Yeah.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Scott Lyons. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So Scott is the creator of the Embody Lab, a hub for embodied education, self-discovery, and healing, and also the developer of Somatic Stress Release, a process of restoring our biological adaptation system. Scott has had the privilege of teaching Embodied Flow, Somatic Stress Release, and body-mind centering workshops and trainings throughout the US, Canada, Europe, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. Scott is also the director of the online 100-hour Somatic Stress Release Certificate training program and co-director of the 60-hour Integrative Somatic Trauma Therapy Certificate program. He was an adjunct professor at New York University from 2007 to 2010, where he co-taught the Viewpoints Studio with Mary Overlie. Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
You got it going on, man.
Having a diverse background is my jam.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, like I said, before we started recording here, I love, the Embody Lab and what you're doing there. Let's get into it here. Well, first of all, where are you from originally and where are you currently?
I am from the land of 10,000 lakes, also known as Minnesota, also known as Dakota land. And I'm actually here right now visiting my family. So nice. It's a nice home experience.
Nice. All right. So how did this start for you? This interest in body work and somatic work. Where did things start?
Yeah. So for me, it was always searching for my own personal healing process and understanding, growing up with a lot of learning disabilities and cognitive challenges. And I felt the most easeful in the arts. And so I got into dance, and suddenly I started to find that people would say, oh, you seem to be able to focus and concentrate for longer periods of time. And so that sparked an interest. And then I got introduced to something called body-mind centering, which is a form of somatics. And, a lot of experiential anatomy and unpacking of developmental movement patterns. And after I went into that full training program. And in the midst of that training program, a lot of the, learning challenges that I had as a kid suddenly disappeared, and I could.
If I may interrupt you for a second, could you, if you don't mind, could you share some of the challenges you had learning? And
oh yeah. So I had a lot of language delays. In fact, one of the things I was told as a kid was I would probably never make it through high school, and so there was a lot of dyslexic tendencies and challenges, even forming sentences sometimes and comprehending what people were saying and making sense of it and being able to reply. I mean, I was always a curious kid, but there were just things that kept getting in my way. And as an adult, I can look back and go, oh, those learning challenges were really a reflection of unprocessed trauma. And the symptomology that I experienced was actually more cognitive than, there were certainly experiences of dissociation, as you'll hear from a lot of people who've experienced trauma, early developmental trauma. But for me, it really manifested as more cognitive functioning. So
thank you for that. So you, at what point did you start training?
When I was 17.
Okay, so early, relatively early.
Yeah. So my introduction into somatic, so body-oriented psychotherapies was actually around 16, 17. And it wasn't until my mid-20s that I started more of the clinical psychology path. I started training in body works, like cranial psychotherapy, forms of osteopathic medicine, about 19. And sort of kept following a trajectory of looking for like what are these elements that help us heal and return ourselves to a sense of wholeness.
Now,
And
excuse me, sorry, you just got me going here with a lot of things.
yeah.
So as you were inquiring about that, were you simultaneously thinking about your own healing process? Was that on the table too?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
the more I was recognizing my own healing, I was inspired by it. I was going, well, why isn't this available more in the mainstreams? Why isn't this taught in schools? Why are we told to sit in a desk all day when clearly, I had such powerful experiences through learning to move my body in ways that I was connected to. And that really, that certainly inspired my value system as well of going, how do we get this type of, I would call it medicine, to a greater number of people and make it more available, which has certainly led me down into my path as an adult, and the companies I've formed to support more accessible education so that we can get this somatics and trauma-informed therapies and trauma-informed education into the schools, into the hospitals, into our homes.
Your story reminds me of that story that Sir Ken Robinson talked. Have you heard that?
No.
Ken Robinson, he was this amazing individual. He was an educator, really strong advocate for education. He did one of the most famous TED Talks. And in this TED Talk, he shares the story about the dancer, the woman who created Cats. And he said that when she was younger, as a young schoolgirl, she just could not focus. She could not keep still. She had a lot of difficulty in school. And I'm not drawing a direct correlation, but it just, what you're saying kind of reminds me of this. And she said that her mom took her to some kind of a doctor, and the doctor chatted with her for a while, chatted with her mom for a while. And the doctor said, you know what? Let's step out for a second. We're going to leave. I forgot what the woman's name was, but young, let's call her Tracy. We're going to leave Tracy in here for a second. Let's step out, give her a minute. And they stepped out of the door. They closed the door and they watched. And before they left, he said he turned on the radio. And he said they were watching her. When they turned on the radio, she started dancing. And he said to her mom, he said, there's nothing wrong with your daughter. She's a dancer. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And what your story just kind of inspires me into how we learn what makes sense for us, our own specific language. So
I would even first of all, thank you for sharing. That's such a beautiful story. And I would even universalize it a little bit more of like, our primary language as beings, as human beings, is movement and sensation. Like before we could articulate ourselves through words, we did it through movement and sound and breath. That's how we experienced ourselves and communicated. And so, certainly thwarting a child's movement is delaying or challenging their connection to their primal language, their primal sense of self. And we can even see that in terms of stress. I mean, one of the elements of stress, so we have first in the stress response cycle an activation. We have an arousal in our body to get us ready to be responsive. And then once we have that, all that energy that's built up, we mobilize it. And that mobilization helps us actualize whatever adaptation we need. And if we think about, a child or an adult being thwarted in their mobilization, in their response, in their adaptation, where does all that energy go?
Right.
And so, we certainly see that in the realms of trauma, when that adaptation energy, that energy intended to help them navigate the stimulus or the situation, is thwarted, we see that starts to create somatic symptoms: depression, gastrointestinal challenges, focal issues, all of the things that I was even describing earlier
Mhm.
of what can happen when we have a thwarted stress response. Also, some people might call that a trauma response.
At what point, Scott, did you decide to kind of, package what you were learning and say, I want to start training people. I want to put things together in programs and so forth?
Pretty well. I didn't create training programs for a while, but I taught nearly right away, because that was actually how I integrated, was to share it verbally, to move with people through it. And and it was always transparent, like, I'm still learning, but this is how I actually integrate and deepen my understanding of things, is through teaching. So teaching was always a beautiful tool for me to understand and integrate. But I would say, maybe about 10 years ago is when I first started going, oh gosh, there's so many modalities I've studied,
Mhm.
and I feel the need and the calling to sort of bring to look at the intersection point of all of these. Because for my own healing journey, I kept going, when I studied to be I'm an osteopath, I'm a psychologist, I'm a body worker, I'm a hypnotherapist. All of these things I kept studying, because I felt like, oh, it's not enough.
Mhm.
It's not like I'm not, I need to be able to understand, how do we approach working with someone, heal and help supporting their healing process from a more global perspective. And psychology doesn't have it all, and body work doesn't have it all, and osteopathic medicine doesn't have it all. um, and and so for me, it was a lot of the trainings I've developed are about, okay, how do we learn to view from a more holistic perspective, whether we enter in from a more psychotherapeutic perspective, or an energetic perspective, or a developmental movement perspective, or a body work perspective. They're all access points into supporting someone's healing process.
Nice, nice. So walk us through the beginnings of the Embody Lab and what it is and why you started it.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I felt the need, as I mentioned, for accessible education. And what I mean by that is that in embodiment, to me, and I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with that word, but it means, for me, coming in and being in touch with our authentic consciousness, our authentic being, and that we are innately embodied, but that there are things that get in our way of experiencing that sense of fulfilled beingness or embodiment. Um, we could call those things trauma or stressors, or whatever
Mhm.
we want to name them. And again, the unpacking or the healing process, and I felt like, needs to be more available, needs to be more accessible to a greater audience. And I don't know a much better way to do that than making an online platform, an online education platform, that really offers a diversity of those ways of navigating the challenges of embodiment, the challenges, the things that have thwarted our process of feeling whole and integrated and well. So
So
yeah.
no, go ahead.
So it's been, a road of learning, in terms of, like, how do you balance business and intention and values, and bringing in really important aspects, that they're like, social justice or social transformation work is another lens that I felt was often missing from somatics, just as much as spirituality was for me. Sorry, that's my dog choking in the
It's okay.
background. He's wanting a little attention. And So, so the what was really important to us is how do we pair, um, be be transparent with business, and to bring in accessible learning practices and scholarships and all of these things, while really holding the integrity of embodiment, not cheapening it, so to
Mhm.
speak, not just trying to create shortcuts, so to speak, but offering people in-depth trainings through a variety of different lenses. We have an embodied social justice program. We have an integrative somatic trauma therapy program. We have a somatic attachment healing program. We have the somatic stress release. You know, there is no one training that does it all in terms of creating universal healing. And so we really are desiring to offer all of these different sort of programs that have their own honoring their own lineage and access point into healing.
Mhm. So people go to the Embody Lab, they go to the website,
Hmm?
theembodylab.com,
Yeah.
and do people, is this a subscription based platform? Is a one-time deal? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we have both. So we have workshops, we have certificate programs, we have a really cool membership program, where I asked a bunch of my friends, like Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Stephen Porges, people who I know who have been on your platform, Dr. Rick Schwartz, David Berselli, people who Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, Justin Michael Williams, people who I feel are embodying their work. That was a big piece for me, and so we have them teach master classes, or core faculty classes as we call them. So there's the membership is twice a month that we have these gatherings with like Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Stephen Porges, which is just, it's intimate, it's fun,
Mhm.
it feels really accessible. That was a big piece for us too. You'll hear that as a big theme, but you know, uh, where it's really an opportunity to get to know these facilitators, these brilliant teachers, and being able to interact with them. That was what I was desiring the most, is opportunity to interact, because
Mhm.
a lot of these big name teachers, often we don't have an opportunity to interact with them and learn from their, not just their education model, but their own journey and process.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. What do you feel? And maybe the Embodied Lab is the answer to this question, but what do you feel therapists now need to pay attention to in terms of working within the context of trauma? Because oftentimes, I mean, let's face it, like you
Mhm.
said, I mean, you yourself had studied a zillion modalities. There's so many modalities out there. But
Yeah.
when someone comes to you and says, Scott, where do I start? What's your response?
That's a great question. I mean, part of where I often ask people where they want to start is, what is your goal? What is your desire? Do I want to work? Is this really about my own healing process? And it's important to be honest about
Mm-hmm.
that. Is this really about my
What do you
desire?
mean my own healing process? Dude, I'm fine.
I'm fine as a therapist. It's not about me. Um, uh, I mean, I think a lot of us who are therapists got into it because we were really desiring our own healing, and some of us made it out of that into being able to then navigate that with other people, and some of us are still in our own healing process working with other people, and that's different.
Right.
um and so where do we start? What is the intention? Like, do I desire to work with organizations? Do I desire to work from a trauma informed perspective in schools? I mean, when we talk about therapists, I want to back up a little bit and name why I was talking about accessibility, is because trauma is everywhere. It's in our school systems, it's in our government, it's in our culture, it's in our homes. And where we often navigate it, or what we perceive the place of navigation, is in a therapeutic office. And that's a very what's called tertiary approach to healing, meaning like from a public health perspective, you've already gotten to the point where someone has been exposed for a significant amount of time and needs individual support. And that same model is something called a primary. And so there's primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the primary is like, how do we create a more resilient society? How do we create systems, resources, more available resources in our larger communities that prevent or mitigate the amount of trauma that might happen? And so for some, that's where they want to spend their focus, is how do I work more on that primary level, building more capacity and resilience and support on a structural level. And some of us really want to work with individuals. And some of us really want to be able to navigate in between working with larger scale organizations and communities, and building capacity and resilience and support, and work with individuals who have actually been navigating a traumatic experience or a traumatic process. And that's actually when we built that program, the Integrative Somatic Trauma Therapy program, which launches this week, actually, that was our intention of like taking the skills of somatics and applying them not only to the individual healing process, but looking at how do we work with groups, and how do we work with culture, and how do we work with organizations using the same technology.
I love that. Give us a little glimpse
Yep.
into that. What is your quote unquote answer to that? How do you address trauma on that primary level, in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we each have, I think, in terms of the faculty, we each have our own approach. Some of us have more of a community health background. Some of us have actually more of an organization background. And by that, I mean like working in the depths with nonprofits and organizing to even groups to having their voices heard. So it's quite a range of how do you work in that primary level.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's through education. And it's no surprise based on my history that I would focus on like kind of repatterning our education system with a trauma-informed approach. My colleagues like Stacey Haynes work a lot in how do you bring this into working to corporate America? Like, how do we repattern the concept of care on these big organizations that do have a trickle-down effect on everyone in our society? So, well, I haven't specified certain tools yet, as I think you're asking. I just wanted to name, there are different inroads to working on more of that public, from that public health perspective, that primary level. And to me, it's about bringing more awareness, more consciousness to the individuals within that global structure, the education structure, and being able to be in touch with themselves and other people, being able to recognize that the needs of people outside of yourself to be able to make informed decisions, even from like a public health perspective. A good example of that is Nkem Ndefo, who's one of the co-directors of this program, built a program for all of LA County hospital systems, an embodied anti-racism, trauma-informed anti-racism program. It's currently, that program is working with over 1 million people right now. Like, it's incredible. And so we're taking the same, somatic-based technology and going, how do we bring it to structures and organizations as much as we might do individuals and groups of individuals?
Right. Do you feel there's a progressive groundswell of awareness that's been happening in terms of trauma, in terms of the existence of trauma?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, there's the Kleenex effect, which is like where all of a sudden, we default every tissue and call it Kleenex. And so there's a way in which trauma has been more understood. And there's a way in which it can be kind of overgeneralized as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so the surge of understanding sometimes brings, like, someone runs into me on the street by accident and I call that a trauma. Well, maybe, but if I default to that, or I start defaulting to things, I start perceiving the world as a place of trauma. And so that's, understanding the sort of boundaries of what trauma is and how we understand it in relationship to our body is actually a trauma-informed technique. So that it doesn't start to, that we don't start to view the world through the lens as trauma.
What's your mission in all this?
That's a lovely question. I mean, to me, it's always been about how do we make this available? And I apologize for using the accessibility and availability word so much, but it's at the heart of what I do and why I want to do it. And I think that, my mission is to be able truly to work through that model, the primary, the secondary, the tertiary, and make, a more embodied, informed, I don't want to be too grandiose, but world. Mm-hmm. And the ways to which we can do that, I think, are through these education programs. I mean, that's certainly the way that I feel is my best approach. While others are really working again in big organizations where not my jam, right. God bless them, going into hospital systems or, major pharmaceutical companies and doing this type of work. Bless, it's needed. It's just, not my mission.
As we kind of wind down here, I'm curious, when you started the Embody Lab, was there kind of an organization out there that was maybe doing similar work, or maybe different, that inspired you, that you wanted to replicate, that you felt was making, something accessible or available in that particular way, or even a person?
Yeah, I mean, I'm inspired by so many of the programs and the teachers out there. Certainly, like Bonnie Bainbridge Cohn, who's a mentor to mine, started Body Mind Centering, and Peter Levine and the SETI, so the Somatic Experiencing Institute. I think that there's schools that inspired me, and a little bit different, which is going, okay, here's this school, here's this school, here's this school, versus what I really wanted to say is like, here's a place where we can all hang out. And no matter where our orientation is in relationship to embodied healing, here's a place we can all come together and explore that as community, and through the lens of experiential education.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Scott, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
My phone number. No, I'm just kidding. The best way is through the Embody Lab at this point. Okay. I mean, I certainly have my own website, but it hasn't been tended to in a while, as I've been tending to the Embody Lab. And so we're in social media and the website, as you mentioned, theembodylab.com.
Awesome. Okay, I'll have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com, along with your phone number. Scott, look, man, you are one inspiring dude. I really appreciate it. Yeah, sincerely.
Thank you. Thank you for doing these. I've listened to quite a few of them, and you've got some of my favorite people on your podcast. And
I appreciate it.
Yeah, you ask great questions.
Appreciate it. All right, take care.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.